Alrighty. Well, thank you for gathering this afternoon to hear a little bit more about Lighthouse for Life. I know some of you may have heard a little bit about us. How many of you before today had heard of Lighthouse for Life? That's fantastic. That's really encouraging. I know that, as I mentioned this morning, I've spoken to several different groups of Lutheran men in mission. That's been a privilege and always good food. And thanks again for the invite for this afternoon. So what we want to discuss today is not a pleasant topic, but it's a very important topic. I know just in looking out over the group of y'all who have gathered, probably most of us are done raising our own children, and we are now helping our children raise our grandchildren. Or you're investing in one way or another in the lives of your grandchildren if you have them, or in other children, youth, young adults that God has brought into your sphere of influence. Regardless, this topic of human trafficking, and particularly sex trafficking, is something that is needful, unfortunately, because what most people don't understand is that, and I didn't understand it until I started working for Lighthouse for Life, is that sex trafficking is all over the place. I live in the Irmo area off of St. Andrews Road near Columbiana Mall in a decent neighborhood, lived there for 20 years, and one of my coworkers she's our survivor support director, her name is Heather. She was trafficked here in the Midlands. She was born and raised in Lexington, and she was trafficked here in the Midlands and other parts of our state from the age of 14 to the age of 32. Well, you do the math, that's 18 years of her life that was spent in the horrific, gut-wrenching, trauma-producing darkness. What I didn't realize when I first came to work for Lighthouse for Life a little over about 3 years ago was just the prolific nature. In fact, just last week, a documentary called The Slave in Our Backyard hit the streaming devices. If you have an Apple TV or you have a subscription to Prime, Amazon Prime Video, you'll be able to watch this documentary. And it's actually features my coworker Heather as a survivor of sex trafficking, and it's not for the faint of heart. One of the other individuals that's interviewed and featured in the video is a man named Bruce, and he was a trafficker. So the documentary, again, The Slave in Our Backyard, talks about from both standpoints, somebody who's been trafficked and somebody who was the trafficker. So I encourage you, if you have, I might have hit that by accident. If you have one of those streaming devices, I think you might have to rent it for $4.99 or $5.99. But I would encourage you to do that, to watch that documentary. How many of you a couple years ago saw the movie? It was actually in the theaters, The Sound of Freedom. Anybody go see that? All right, just a few of you. That movie was very true to life, even though the context of it was in Central and South America. It was very much true to life. And the context was members of a group trying to rescue girls and boys and women and men from being trafficked in that culture of Central and South America. So a lot of times what we find is that people generally think, well, I'm familiar with sex trafficking. I know that it exists, but it exists over there. It exists on the other side of the planet. It exists south of the border. It's the cartel, or it's women being shipped across the ocean in containers and then sold into sex slavery here in the U.S. That does happen. Other people might think about sex trafficking as kind of a snatch and grab. And in other words, a unmarked van pulls up along a busy street in a big city, Chicago, New York, Dallas, whatever, and somebody jumps out, grabs a child or a woman or a man or a boy and shoves them into the van, and they're never heard of again. Does that happen? It happens. However, sex trafficking is far more than that. And as technology permitting, that's okay. We can do this on the fly, no worries. So, Lighthouse for Life, we just celebrated our 10th anniversary. I think I mentioned that this morning. We started in 2014, and I'm going to come down there. Well, hang on one second. Since the PowerPoint projector is not going to work, I'm going to just join you down here. I like this better. So we started in 2014, and the founder of Lighthouse for Life was at a church service one Sunday, and the preacher was featuring, or the topic under consideration that morning was human trafficking, and he had a guest speaker come, and the guest speaker was Captain Heidi Jackson from Richland County. And some of you have heard this story before if you're familiar with Lighthouse for Life. But the story that began our ministry was that story that Captain Heidi Jackson told that morning about a 16, 17, I think, year-old female who was raised in a solid Christian home. She was a member of she was a solid member of her church's youth group. She was a honor roll student at her school. This happened in the Midlands, not far from here. And one weekend, she was invited to a party, and at that party, drugs were introduced, and she experimented. She dabbled in the drugs that were present at the time, and photos were taken of her doing that, and she woke up the next morning with some of these incriminating photographs, and the text said, "Do what we tell you to do and nobody gets hurt." Well, you say, well, that's out of the movies. Well, this was real life for this young woman. And so that began a horrific tale of becoming a victim of sex trafficking. Again, keep in mind, this young woman was the daughter of two-parent home. She had a younger sister. She was an honor roll student. She was involved in her youth group. She was popular at school. She was kind of what we might consider the all-American child. She lived in a gated community. Why do I give you these specific details? It's to show you that socioeconomics, sex trafficking knows no boundaries. It knows no socioeconomic borders. It doesn't matter what race, what religion, what age, what gender, you are vulnerable to being lured into this world. This young woman began to crawl out of her window at night to go do what she was told to do, and additional incriminating videos were taken to leverage against her. And that's how that story, our founder, Andrea Wynn, was in the audience that morning and heard that story, and as she was driving home that afternoon, she said, "Lord, what do you want me to do about this? What role can I play? And it was as though the Lord gave her a picture, a vision, as it were, of a lighthouse, and surrounding that lighthouse were different small cottages, all kind of looking at this lighthouse for light. And so Lighthouse for Life was birthed out of that vision. And the original idea, the original model for Lighthouse for Life was to build safe houses for minors that were caught up and ensnared in this wickedness of sex trafficking. That's not how the Lord has had it play out. We do have a safe house, as I mentioned earlier in my introductory remarks this morning. However, it's not open. It was open earlier, just before COVID in 2018. We got open, and the late 2018, early 2019, and then of course COVID hit, and then we closed down for a number of reasons. It takes a tremendous amount of financial underpinning to run a safe house, because we have to have 24/7, 365, 2 caregivers awake at all times. So it takes a lot of money to have a safe house open. Last month, January is Human Trafficking Awareness Month, and I think it's the second Monday of January each year, we meet with the AG's office. There's the media come, and it's quite a to-do. The governor is there, the governor's wife is there, the AG, Alan Wilson, addresses the crowd, and just last month he was reflecting back on statistics. And we can't know for sure, because statistics with regard to sex trafficking, it's one of those crimes that is hidden in plain sight. And so unless people are coming forward, much like domestic violence, a lot of domestic violence victims and survivors don't come forward for fear of retribution. The same thing happens with sex trafficking. And so, but as best we know, with the statistics that we've been able to gather, that the AG's office has been able to gather over the last couple of years, there's close to 400 children in the state of South Carolina who are victims in some form or fashion. These are minors, these are children, 400, close to that number, who need a safe house. These are children who are currently in DSS custody of some kind. They're not even in foster care. They're just out there somewhere. Many of them are sleeping in DSS offices around the state. It's heartbreaking. Lighthouse for Life, as I mentioned this morning, we have just received our licensure, and Lord willing, within the next few months, we'll be able to open our safe house, but even so, we'll only have 5 beds. There's only one other organization in our state right now, and it's in the Low Country, and they have 10 beds. And I think so if they're fully occupied and we're fully occupied, that's only 15 out of 400. So I'm asking you folks to pray and ask the Lord to provide the funding so that we can open to provide 5 beds. In our safe house, and again, as I mentioned, this is for female victims of sex trafficking, ages 12 to 21. Sadly, both boys and girls are trafficked. We don't have the bandwidth to minister to boys. Women and men are trafficked. We don't have the capacity yet to minister to men. But we do have a drop-in center on St. Andrews Road that, as I mentioned, was just open last year, and it is for adult females victims of sex trafficking. with technology now, we have the ability, and we just signed a contract with a group called Freedom Signal, and I've got a little poster on my table over here regarding Freedom Signal. Freedom Signal allows, and some of you who are technologically savvy would be able to describe this way better than I, but it allows us, we can say our safe house or our drop-in center is in the 29210 zip code. Give us phone numbers that are in some way associated with sex for sale within a 5, a 10, a 15, a 20, 25 mile radius. So we asked them to do that. As we were praying about investing in getting this database, we asked them, could you run the numbers within 50 miles, 50, of the 29210 zip code? And let us know. And I don't understand how they gather their data, but it's a well-known organization. We've vetted them. We've researched how they gather their data and the accuracy of it. But over 5,000 phone numbers, over 5,000 phone numbers, just in the 29210, a 50-mile radius of where our drop-in center is, are associated in some form or fashion with sex for sale. What do we mean by that? Well, that may mean that somebody is selling themselves just because, but the vast majority of those numbers are associated, they might be associated with a trafficker, a pimp, or those phone numbers might be associated with somebody who themselves is being trafficked. And so starting in March, we're going to have some training with our staff and with the folks who put this program of Freedom Signal together, and we will be trained to know how to use it to its full function, and we'll be able to reach out to the folks associated with that number and say, we're here to help you. We have a drop-in center. And we're not going to use a 50-mile radius, because a lot of these victims of sex trafficking, they have no transportation, so they can't get to us. But we'll start small. But even so, starting small, and these are just the numbers that we're aware about. And that's right here in the state of South Carolina. That's right here in the Midlands. I've shared with several of you that I've talked to, and we've had meals together, that I live in just near Columbiana Mall, and the house 4 houses down from me, I raised my kids, we've been there 20 years now. My coworker was trafficked out of a house 4 houses down from me. I had no idea. She was sold for sex 4 houses down. My children were little at the time. They're all grown and out of the house now. But now I have grandchildren, as do many of you. And that's why when we were considering what do we name the documentary, The Slave in Our Backyard. Because whether you live in Malden or Lexington or Batesburg or Columbia or Irmo or wherever, in the low country, in the upstate, there are slaves in your backyard that you don't even know are there. You might see them as you walk your dog. You might go by them as you're filling up at the gas station. We were talking at lunch just now, and we were talking about meeting somebody you see homeless people. Randy was down at the beach, and I don't know if can't remember if you were pulled up to a gas station or whatever, or to a stoplight, and here's a woman with a baby begging, and Randy's got a big heart, and he wants to provide a meal for this mom and her child, Well, just as he's about to approach this person, somebody in a Lexus pulls up, the woman and her baby get in the Lexus and drive away. And I told Randy afterward, I said, I don't know, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if that woman was a victim of sex trafficking. Has all the telltale signs. I had a phone call this week from somebody who lives near Dutch Square Mall, and we get these phone calls a lot because of what we do, and people hear about Lighthouse for Life and they go, well, I just saw this. I wonder if they can tell me what to do. So this gentleman called me and he said, there's a house in my neighborhood that's been vacant for a while, and I noticed that some homeless people have been living there, and we've called the authorities and all of that. But recently, walking up and down my street are women who are scantily clad, and I see them going into this house and I see them coming out of this house. What do I do? And as we began to talk about that, I said, this has all the telltale signs of something that's going on with sex trafficking. And again, when we think of these, and I'm going to talk pretty much exclusively about women because that is who we minister to, we think of prostitution. Here's a woman who's just selling herself for sex. She's selling herself in order to receive something. But by definition, human trafficking, and you live in Batesburg, and there's probably a lot of labor trafficking in Batesburg, Leesville, Gilbert, Saluda County is ripe with labor trafficking. The cartel is all over Saluda County, by the way, and there's massive problems with sex trafficking in Saluda County as well, in Lexington County, Richland. It doesn't matter what county, but when we think about these things, please understand that statistically speaking, prostitution as we know it, and we refer to it as the oldest occupation in history in the books, well, conservatively, 85-90% of prostitutes aren't selling themselves just for the jollies of it. They're being sold. A friend gave me a story about he was getting gas at a gas station on 26th and St. Andrews, very close to our drop-in center, and he said, I was just pumping gas, and a woman came up to me and said, I'll do anything for you for $20. And I said, I don't know what that was, but I can guess. These women have a quota to fill. If she wasn't being trafficked and filling her quota, she was probably doing what we in our world call survival sex. Because imagine a child who's been sold for sex since they were children, 12, 13, 14, and now they're in their 20s or 30s. That's all they know. That's all they know. And so when a woman like the survivors that we serve, when they come out of the life, and it takes on average 7 attempts to get out of the life before, on average, to get out and stay out. But once they're out, the temptation to go back into that life is so strong and so compelling. What was the reason I gave you, Randy? Why is it so compelling for women to go back into that life? That's all they know. Because remember, they've been sold since they were children. And by the way, the horrific thing is, statistically, and you all may know this, statistically, most children who are sold for sex are sold by a family member. Could be their parents. We were talking just last week, a woman reached out to us, and her story is just one of those horrific stories. Her mom and her mom's boyfriend, from when she was little, her mom and her mom's boyfriend were selling her. She's now in her 20s, and we were able to intervene and get her to a place, Drug addiction is a huge part of sex trafficking because the trafficker can lure a person in, and then if they can get them hooked on drugs, then they've got them held captive. And it's hard to break free of drug abuse. Many of you may have a relative or a family member who struggles with drug addiction. I do. And it's horrific. And it's hard to break free of that. So Lighthouse for Life steps in, whether it's these children that we will serve at our safe house, and that safe house will have wraparound services. We'll have our own educator, our own homeschool, because you don't want these children to go out back into the public school or any type of schooling situation because they're so vulnerable. Speaking of vulnerabilities, just because it's a couple hours after lunch and I want you to stay awake with me, and call out your answers loudly. When you think of vulnerabilities, who might be vulnerable to being trafficked? Anybody. Randy says anybody, which is absolutely true. Single women, yep. Pardon me? Oh, yes, sorry. Runaways, absolutely. If you've got a loved one, a friend, a grandchild who's rebelling against their parents and they're runaways, they are so vulnerable. The reason they're so vulnerable, and as Randy said, anybody, and again, if we were able to go through our PowerPoint presentation with you, we talk about vulnerabilities at length because anyone at any point in time and in life can be vulnerable, which is why I started a moment ago by telling you the story of the origin of Lighthouse for Life. Because you would probably say, most of us would say, that context, two-parent home, gated community, well-known in the community, well-known at school, in the church, all the things, if anybody's protected from vulnerabilities, that child was. But here she fell prey to it. The foster system, and there's a lot of kids in foster homes, bounce, 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 obvious vulnerabilities. Children in single-parent homes are very vulnerable. Another story that happened just 2 or 3 years ago here in I think it was in Richland County, was a young teenager whose social media, as you can imagine, plays such an incredibly wicked role in luring teenagers in to the trap of sex trafficking. But this young, I don't know how old she was, 12, 13, 14, she wasn't driving yet. She and her mom were on the outs, and she posted some things on social media. An older girl saw the post, somebody she didn't even know, messaged her and said, I know how you feel. It's rough being a teenager. I went through these same things with my mom. And this older girl, one thing led to another, and she began to build an online relationship with her. And soon they met in person. And this older girl took this younger girl out to the zoo, to the mall, et cetera, and just began to lavish her with affection, not homosexual affection, just an older sister to a younger sister type of affection. And she was grooming this child. And as the social media posts heated up and the relationship with this young girl's relationship with her mom continued to sour, this older girl capitalized on that. And before you knew it, the older girl said to the younger girl, hey, why don't you come and just spend the weekend with me? It sounds like you really need to get away. You and your mom just need a break. I know how this is. I went through that with my mom. Well, I can't get to where you are. I don't drive. Well, I'll send a taxi for you. Oh, okay, that sounds great. Taxi came up. The girl got in the car, dropped her off at this other woman's apartment or house, And the first thing that the oh, hi, so good to see you again. And before long, the phone was taken from the young girl. It was passed back to somebody else. And now this girl's mom had no idea where she was. The isolation took place because she had no phone now. And the SIM card was taken out. She couldn't track her child. And before long, she was roped into trafficking and was said, you live with us now, and everybody's got to share the load financially. We've got to eat, we've got to have clothes, so I'm going to teach you what you need to do in order to provide for our home. And so that's how this young child was first introduced and lured into sex trafficking. And you go, wait a minute, that was by an older girl. Well, as I mentioned a moment ago, those who are being trafficked, the older girls or women in the group have a quota to meet. And if their bodies get worn out, then they've got to go and recruit to draw more people in. And so they'll show up at sporting events, they'll show up at the mall, they'll show up at the zoo, and these traffickers and those who are recruiting, think of your recruiters that come to see your sons and your grandsons and granddaughters play sports legitimately. Well, there are recruiters in the stands at your local Lexington High School football game, or Irmo High School, and they're on the lookout for those amongst the crowd that are most vulnerable. What time is it, Tom? 25. Okay. So the vulnerability part is key. Knowing what to look for in vulnerabilities in the community, just like this mom and her daughter that Randy saw at the stoplight down at the beach. So, what can you do to help in this fight against sex trafficking?
Teach.
Okay, tell me more.
You have to learn more about what it's really all about and how to approach the people that you're speaking with.
So our brother said, teach. We have to learn more about what this is all about, and particularly how to approach those who may be in trouble. Interesting the way that you framed it, because that was one of the questions this gentleman asked me a couple of days ago, who lives in the Dutch Square Mall area. He said, what do I say to these women? I'm glad he asked the question, because it's key. Most of us, there's what, 2 ladies in the room this afternoon, or 2 or 3. You and I, guys, we got to be super careful for obvious reasons. And I said to this man, I said, if these women are walking, they were literally walking through his front yard. I said, have your wife go out and speak to them. But don't use the word trafficking, because interestingly, again, because so many of them have been trafficked from childhood, they don't know that they're being trafficked. We can't comprehend that in the safety of our homes and our lives, but these women, they don't know they're being trafficked. So I said to this gentleman, have your wife, or you and your wife, or you and your daughter go out and introduce yourself and say, is everything okay? And from their vantage point, everything is probably okay. Well, just letting you know that we live over here, and should you ever need anything, just please come knock on the door. In other words, make yourself available, just like Randy does. He's not going to let anybody go hungry. So he's making himself available so that those vulnerabilities can be met. Because if you give somebody something to eat, a lot of these women will, this is a nuance of trafficking that's not trafficking, If a woman says, I will do anything for you for $20, that's not sex trafficking by definition, because she's offering herself to you. Unless, as I mentioned, there's somebody back here in a car over here, or that she's being forced to do that. She's being forced to sell herself. So by definition, sex trafficking is when somebody exchanges a sex act for something of value. They're forced or they're coerced by somebody to sell themselves, to perform a act for something of value. So what is of value? We've already talked about it, but what might somebody do that in exchange for? What might a woman perform a sex act in exchange for something? What might she do that for? Money? Food? Shelter? Self-preservation? Drugs? Yeah, the human basic needs of food, shelter, and clothing. All right? So if a man comes to a woman and says, if you have sex with me, I will give you a place to stay tonight, or I will give you a meal, or I will give you money, that woman is being purchased as a common slave, because something of value is being exchanged for what the act that she's going to perform. So another area of prayer that you guys can join us in, I can't remember who I was talking to earlier this morning, but we are actively involved in the state legislators, hoping to pass a bill called the Demand Reduction Act, whereby it's going to accomplish several things, one of which is currently South Carolina is like 48 out of 50, sadly, in how purchasers of sex are punished. Right now it's a slap on the wrist. It's a misdemeanor, $125 fine. If you purchase another person for sex and you're caught, which it's really hard to catch, but if you are caught, you're slapped on the wrist and you're fined $125. North Carolina, in December of last year, passed a law whereby solicitation, i.e. a purchaser of sex, will be charged with a felony. We've tracked various states around the nation where this has happened, and guess what? If Rock Hill, of course, borders Charlotte, right? Those of you who go to the beach, you've got those North Carolina, South Carolina towns at the beach, and across the state. You know, Spartanburg is close. You know, you're getting up toward the North Carolina border and so forth. What happens in South Carolina when North Carolina calls it a felony? What do you think happens now in South Carolina? Yeah, traffickers are flooding into South Carolina from North Carolina, because they know both traffickers and buyers, both sellers and buyers of sex, are flooding into South Carolina, especially our border towns, because they know that they'll just get a slap on the wrist. So we're trying to get a bill passed that will make the purchase of another human being a felony, not just a misdemeanor. That the fine will be greater, that it will be a felony, not a misdemeanor. So will you pray with us that that will happen? We finally just a couple of weeks ago got a sponsor for the bill, but there's some holdup. There's some holdup in our legislators. Some people are against that. And to us who fight this evil darkness, it just doesn't make any sense. This is slavery, brothers and sisters. This is modern day slavery. So there's a whole lot more that we could talk about, but do you have some questions that I could answer, either about Lighthouse for Life? I must tell you, a week from now, we have we have two major annual fundraisers, and this is a family event next Saturday evening at Saluda Shoals, just on the other side of the dam. We call it Light the Fight, and you can register on our website. It's, I think, $35 for registration. It's a family event. You can bring your grandkids, bring your dogs, bring your strollers, whatever, but I do want to make mention that is one of our major fundraisers this year, and all of our fundraising this first quarter is going to go toward seeking to get our safe house open. So, but yeah, what questions do you have in our final minutes together?
Who's sponsoring the bill, and you notice the bill number?
It actually hasn't been given a number yet because it has to go through a subcommittee, and if you get my card, if we can exchange numbers, I'll get some more information about who's sponsoring that. He's actually from the upstate.
Once it becomes a bill, we can call our representatives and support.
Yeah. Once it becomes a bill and it has a number, then you can call your representatives and encourage them to support that. Yeah.
How prominent are the cartels?
The question is, how prominent are the cartels? Very prominent. I didn't know just how prominent they are in our area until last November, December. I met a pastor from Saluda County, and he's Hispanic and has a largely Hispanic church there. I don't remember the name of the church, but he was just lamenting the power of the cartel in our backyard in Saluda County. Yeah, it's and of course the cartel with as I mentioned, both labor trafficking and sex trafficking. It's huge. We were just exposing him to the realities of sex trafficking. He's very familiar. He's got people in his congregation who are, victims of labor trafficking. Yep. Other questions? If you have a few minutes after we're finished, come and grab a few things. There's just a little bit more information about Lighthouse for Life, and we love Jesus, as I shared with both the men's groups that I've had the privilege of speaking to. If we just help rescue these women, we're not involved in sting operations or any of that kind of thing. We train law enforcement as to what to look for, but as women come to us, we help rebuild their lives from the ground up. And as has been shared on a number of different occasions already here today, the gospel of Jesus Christ is the light that penetrates this awful darkness. And as, in fact, our survivor support, my coworkers today, along with 4 of our survivors who've been out of the life for a few years, they're at a retreat in Georgia, northeast Georgia today and this weekend. And, we just bring the gospel. We just bring the gospel. Every interaction we have with these women and with these children. Yes, sir. The question is, what is the name of the Low Country group that has 10 beds? Pardon? It's not My Sister's House. Formation. I think it's Formation Project. I think there's one on Switch is up in Greenville. It's not a safe house, but it's a ministry similar to what we do at Lighthouse for Life.
Have you ever had any problem with the cartel coming after y'all?
The question was, have we ever had any problem with the cartel coming after us? We haven't, but we haven't had a visible piece of property before. Of course, our safe house is a safe house. It's in an undisclosed location for obvious reasons. Our drop-in center is visible. It right there on St. Andrews Road. It says the Harbor, Lighthouse for Life. I was kind of the project manager for getting that property renovated, and we had a lot of questions about security. So we have a good, not totally state-of-the-art, but we have a decent security system there. And my staff, the 3 ladies that work there, have been trained as to what to look out for. We don't open the door for just anybody, because a lot of these women, they're literally on the run. Last year we intercepted actually it was a year ago this month. I was just looking in my prayer journal. A year ago this month, we intersected with a lady from the Low Country who was running from her trafficker. She ended up on the State House grounds. SLED was called. The law enforcement, Richland County was called. We have a great relationship with them, so we intercepted that situation. They called us and said, hey, we've got this young woman, and this is one of our stories of hope, because we were able to take that lady, she's 21 years of age, literally running from her trafficker, like literally she's running and ends up on downtown, and we were able to get her into a long-term program in another state, because there, of course, like I mentioned, there was drugs involved and specialized counseling that's needed to begin to unravel the trauma that these women have gone through. So, but yeah, we have thus far been kept safe. We're anticipating that when this documentary hits in mass, that you're familiar with Ephesians 6, that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities in the heavenlies. My coworker Heather, we're covering her with prayer every day, because when she steps out and speaks out, it's not so much physical danger that she's in, but my goodness, the things that come back up to her from her story are just, as you can imagine, just absolutely horrific. Yes, sir. Yeah, our brother said that after he had heard me speak at another event, he went immediately and spoke to his grandson and said, look, there's nothing you can do that you can't come and talk to me about. And I'll wrap it up, because I know we're out of time, since we're a group of men, but I know that pornography is not just a men's thing only. And I said this to when Philippe invited me to their church. If anyone who's involved in pornography, if you're looking at pornography, you are fueling the flame of sex trafficking. Because where do they get those people? Where do those pictures come from? Where do those videos come from? What is sold on the dark web? It's women who've been lured into this wicked darkness. Videos, photographs, etc. are being taken. And so if you are battling the addiction of pornography, or if you know somebody who is, family member, coworker, friend, man, woman, I'm just being honest with you, brothers. Anyone who pays for or uses a free version of pornography is only fueling the fire of sex trafficking, because that's where it happens. So seek help. Seek help from Jesus. Seek help from a pastor, a trusted friend. But don't Don't keep adding fuel to that fire, please. Thanks so much again for your attentiveness.